building, they would find her. So I do want her to share some of her favorite things that she's done and kind of some lessons learned and cross-feed ideas for us. But I will kind of just tell you a couple of things. Number one, she's worked in a variety of areas, including the lab, AFRL, including some systems contracting time, including just a variety of things. But she spent the last golly, maybe 5 or 6 years that we were in the same place as chief of the rapid acquisition cell doing contracting work that really was trying to get on rapid. And so they did some unique things, and this is a great opportunity for her to not only share those, but some other things that she's seen since then, and then things other people have just built on across. So I look forward to hearing this. And Lorna, I thank you for joining us and sharing.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I do want to mention up front, though, that these are not the opinions of my employer, MITRE Corporation. These are just the way Lorna sees the world. I wrapped up 31 years with the Air Force, most of that time as a contracting officer about 3 years ago. My special sauce was always creative solutions, being able to turn things around quickly. And then once I retired, I spent my first full year, and I didn't mean for it to be a full year before I started work at MITRE. It turned out that way. But I spent that year as an independent rapid acquisition consultant, and I got to see how things were on the other side of the desk. And there were a lot of surprises. First of all, I found out that although I had always considered myself to be very progressive as a contracting officer, it was never enough. I mean, I was the CIBR queen at times and the BAA queen at times. During my career, I spent like 8 years in a row working CIBR 1, 2, and 3s in the lab. And then after that, another 2 years working. I did a lot of other stuff too, but that was kind of an extra duty. 2 years working test center SBIRs. And I had a small business with my then husband that had been very successful. We had sold it, and then I had an ongoing labor of love in the publishing industry. So I had a real affection for small businesses, but I had never worked with the government. I mean, avoiding all conflict of interest or whatnot. And so I didn't really understand what contractors were going through, especially small businesses. I just thought, as long as I can get them paid on time and I can kind of explain clauses to them, it's great. But it's not enough. And it wasn't enough then. And even with all of the great stuff that AFWorks is doing with the SBIR program, it's still not enough. You don't realize on the government side of the table how difficult it is particularly for small businesses and for your non-traditional defense contractors, your startups. You kind of think of all contractors as being the uber smart. I call them the big boys of contracting. You got your Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop and Boeing and all the big contractors who really, they know all the details. And a lot of times they know better than the government's folks sitting on the other side of the desk. But you get small businesses and they're like, what's the FAR? And I had SBIR contractors who actually signed contracts who they didn't know what the clauses were in the contract because they never even read the document. I mean, I fight with my landlord over, I need more time to read my lease because I'm going to read every word of it. And yet I was seeing small businesses who were signing $100K, $500K, $1 million contracts who had never read them because it was just too difficult. They could not understand what the government wanted and what all these clauses were about. So that's one area that I see that we really still need to lower the barriers. And I guess where I really had a moment of enlightenment was my very last TDY when I was working as a contracting officer. And it was literally like 6 weeks before I retired. And it was to go speak at an innovation conference. And I had been for the previous 5 years or so, people all over the country would call me and say, "Hey, I hear you've done oral proposals. Can you send me your lessons learned, send me your templates, or you've done 10 USC 2373. Can you send me your DNF and show me how you did that?" And so I would spend, sometimes late at night, sometimes lunch hours or weekends talking to people around the country about, here are different tools that you can use. So anyway, I went to this conference where I got a chance to talk about these particular tools. And I had kind of been in my own little contracting silo. I really hadn't talked to many people outside my own base, let alone outside of the Air Force or outside of DoD. I didn't know what was going on with civilian agencies. I didn't know what was going on with NATO. I didn't know what was going on really with anybody else, even with industry. So I got a chance to meet people I'd never really talked to before and see how they thought about acquisition. And some of them were like, what's acquisition? I mean, really had no clue. Um, and I found out that I didn't have enough of a clue about what they were doing in the field either. They didn't understand all the pushing of paper that I was doing to get them what they needed, and I didn't really understand necessarily why they needed things at a certain point in time. I had probably a better understanding because I had worked with SOCOM, and I understood how to get things out fast for them, but I didn't understand all the moving pieces out there in what we call the defense ecosystem or the defense innovation ecosystem. So I was at this conference, and this speaker was talking to me, and there was somebody else sitting with us at the time, and the speaker was talking about how things were getting pretty desperate as far as us getting things done on time. That we were getting really far behind, and China and Russia were becoming really serious issues for us. And the guy beside me says, "Oh yeah, but if we don't get it done, somebody will get it done." He says, who? Who do you think's going to get it done if not you?" The guy beside me said, "Well, if we don't get it done on time, somebody's going to swoop in and take care of it." And the guy who was speaking said, I don't know who you think's going to take care of it. Maybe you've been watching too many movies, but we don't have like 50 acquisition gurus sitting in a room somewhere with nothing to do but wait for us to fail so that they can swoop in and fix it all. We are the last line of defense. So if you don't get it done, it's not going to get done. And so that kind of shocked me. And then he said something that was really stuck with me. And I'll say this in a polite way. He said, "If we go to war with China today, we are going to get our stuff rocked." And I kind of went, whoa, this is not the 1990s when we were at the top of our game acquisition wise, and we were ahead of China and Russia. And we were talking about them being our near peers. And that really made me realize that they're no longer near peers. This is serious stuff. And yet we still kind of have that attitude of we're the best, we're number one. And it's almost like it's unpatriotic to say we've let ourselves get behind. And that's not a political statement by any means, because I've seen this across various administrations. But we are behind, and the world has changed around us, and we really haven't kept up with that. And a lot of it has to do with how we understand the industry side and what their objectives are. Right after, well, I guess it's a year after I went to that conference, I went to a national security conference. This was when I was still a consultant. And it was specifically on China and what's going on with China as far as their national strategy and how they're becoming self-sufficient. And a lot about, because I met a lot of startups at this conference who talked about China wanting to invest in their companies. They're trying to get, $50,000, $100,000 contracts with the US government because they've got some really cool technology that the government really needs. And yet there are all these barriers to doing business with the government. And they have to wait forever to hear back from the government. It's very difficult for them in ways that you don't realize if you've always been on the government side of the fence. And so I listened to all these contractors talk about how difficult it was, and it's just so much easier for them to say, well, why not accept money from China as an investor? Why not? I'm global. Why not? And what they talked about then was how once they would do business with the Chinese government or with Chinese investors, a year later, their IP was gone. That the government of China had taken their IP, because in China it's a different in the sense of, if you're a company, a contractor working in China, then all your ideas belong to the Chinese government. And that's not how we think in the US. We still separate that out as far as who's sovereign, and are you a contractor, are you your own entity? And it's just a different way of thinking about things. So this it really made me reconsider what we need to do to lower the barriers. And as I did more work as a consultant, I got a chance to see more and more about what these barriers were. I mean, right down to SAM.gov registrations. After 31 years in this career field, it still took me, after I got all my stuff together, it still took me 4 hours to register. And there were several times that I just got up and I walked away from it. I was like, okay, I need to register to be a subcontractor on this particular job. Do I really want to do this? Maybe I don't really want the money bad enough, because it was just so overwhelming. And you wouldn't think it would be. And we never do on the government side think it's going to be that difficult. But this is what, just the very basic to do business with the government. This is how hard it is. And I actually talked to the guy who came up with the whole SAM.gov system of registration, and he, as a contractor, had to go through the same thing. It was like, where did this come from? How did it get to be this hard? It was just. I mean, that's the very first step too that we tell potential contractors to do, is you need to go to SAM.gov and register. Okay, that's going to turn people away right there. But what's really changed a lot, and I'll go back to talking a lot about the 1990s, because that was the last big acquisition innovation timeframe. We didn't call it innovation at the time. We called it ac reform or streamlining. So back in the 90s, if you were a small business wanting to do research, the dollars were with the government. And the government holding the money was like, okay, you're going to play by our rules. We got the money. We made the rules. It's not that way anymore. Now, the bulk of R&D money and investment funds, that's coming from outside the government. So why should a company go through what the government puts them through when they can go to an investor? Maybe not a Chinese investor, but let's say just a local investor who will give them, several $1 million to go do something, more than they get through the SBIR program, at least initially, and not put them through the same hoops to propose or to pitch that. It's really different looking at how venture capitalists work. You can have a small startup who has, say 20 people, really hot new technology, something that the Defense Department really needs, and they need investors to keep going. So they will do like a 20-minute, maybe a 40-minute pitch, and they'll work maybe a week to get that pitch honed, and then they'll pitch an investor, and the investor makes the decision on the spot, and they've got the money, in short order. It's just not so with the government. With the government, it's okay. So how are you going to how are you going to write this proposal? Is it going to be, it's probably not going to be 20 minutes or 40 minutes. I mean, we are doing more pitch days, yes, and this is great. Um, but they are spending so much more time putting together their basic pitch to get money that maybe it's not going to be days and probably not weeks. It's going to be at least months in most cases before they even know if they got it or not. And just the stuff that we put them through, and the government no longer holds all the cards in regard to having that R&D money. So they're like, okay, do I really want to do that? And by the way, the government's going to want all my IP. So that IP is my future bread and butter of my business. Do I really want to give that away and sign up to unlimited rights when I'm going to need this to keep my business going? Um, and on the government side, the government is looking at it like, oh, I don't want to get into vendor lock when we get to production in 10 years. uh, so they want all rights up front. And the two don't understand each other. Um, Startups and small businesses who've never done business with the government before don't understand why the government wants all their IP. And on the other side, um, the contracting officer is like, no, I don't dare get into vendor lock later on, so I need everything up front. There is room to meet in the middle, but it helps if industry understands where government is and what they're thinking and why they're thinking that. But government also needs to look at, if I can't exploit these rights, why would I want them? Um, why would I take that from a contractor? Um, when I was a consultant, one of my very first jobs that I never took, I never took this task. They said, yes, we'll pay you very well, but we also want your IP. And I said, all right. I don't have any problem with that. Everything that it makes perfect sense. Everything that I produce on this particular task, that goes to the government. All my rights go to the government on that because you're paying me for that. And they said, yes, but we want more than that. We want any IP that you're working on. Okay, well, I'm working on an urban fantasy series of novels that don't have anything to do with this task at all. I mean, unless we're going to start doing time travel or something, there's no relationship there. And they said, yeah, well, yeah, we want that too. Like, no, I'm not going to give you my copyrights to my novels. And then they said, oh, and by the way, we want the copyrights to any IP you've ever done. It's like, you mean the romance novels I wrote back in 1992 or so? Yes. And I said, no, I'll pass. And but why? Because I'm not going to give away my IP like that. I have plans for that, and I want to write more books someday, and I don't want you to own all my copyrights. Well, and they actually tried to hold out on me and kind of back me into a corner, thinking that I had no choice. But see, that's the thing, is that now industry has more choices than they've ever had before. With R&D, it used to be you didn't have any choice but to go to the government. If you really wanted to do the hot new technology, that's where it was. But now it's not that way. And small businesses have a choice.
So I have a question for you, Lorna, on that
Yes.
topic. So I think the point you're making there is the government is not driving the latest advances in R&D. And so we saw, just recently in the past few years, like folks may be familiar with like Google's Project Maven. They didn't want anything to do with the government at a certain point once they were getting certain kind of perceptions in the news. One question I have for you is, I remember when Dr. Roper was tenured in an office, a comment that he would repeatedly make is that the Air Force is not trying to create new defense primes with the way that it's stimulating new R&D, particularly with the SBIR program. What do you think he meant by that? That we're not trying to create new defense primes?
Well, instead of trying to create a whole new defense prime system, why not just use what's already out there? I mean, yeah, you can talk about dual use. Dual use is not a new term, by the way. That was a term that in the 90s, we were in the labs, we were encouraging companies to come in and tell us what your dual use technology is. Tell us what the military application is. Tell us what the commercial application is, but you should have both. And we were actually making that like a factor in our source selections at the time. But why not tap into industry as it already is and get their great ideas now instead of trying to force them into strictly military applications? That has much stronger implications as far as the economy if you're doing it for besides military. It's not just to get the price down for the military, but to get this technology out to everybody and level up everybody.
Sure, that definitely helps. That definitely I never quite made that connection until you explained that. So that was really helpful. I guess if I could step in here and then just ask about how we can access that R&D. I think one positive thing about just the whole COVID, a positive disruption it's brought in the way we conduct business is there's increased adoption of just like tools like Teams and Zoom and WebEx and other collaboration tools. And sometimes I think that for small businesses, there's a lot of overhead they have to manage just to get FaceTime with contracting officers. Like actually, like for instance, in this case, just to get on Robins Air Force Base, attend a pitch day event, right, and then be positioned for a contract. What are some best practices you've seen just within the past year, just within increasing access to government contracting?
I love the pitch days, and we've been doing these for several years now, but they've really caught on in the last year. I've been a longtime fan of oral proposals because it's less for the contractors to have to do. But with the pitch days, it makes it look more like if they're pitching a venture capitalist investor. It's more that business norm than this special structure that the government has set up to do business with the government. A couple of things that I'm really pushing right now is with stuff like RFIs and BAAs, because those are two really good ways to tap into that market. Now, what I'm seeing that's kind of disturbing, and this has just happened over the last few years, with RFIs, I'm seeing the government put out RFIs where they haven't done their own homework, and they're wanting like a small business to sit down and give them 100 pages of background on something, or RFIs that are 20, 30 pages long. Same with BAAs that are 60, 75 pages long. They don't have time to read all of this. I mean, let's say you got that small business that has 20 people. Everybody in the company is working full time. When are they going to write these proposals or these pitches? That's a weekend job, a nighttime job. They don't have somebody usually who is there just to write proposals. I mean, they've got the expertise within the company. Those experts are the ones who are writing it in their spare time. So if they're looking at an RFI that says, we need you to give us back, all these different pages, or the RFI is so long, they don't have time to read all of that. So the RFIs need to be upfront. Here's like a very short executive summary. And then after that, the technical aspects, because this is what they're looking for, how they can fit their technology in with what the government wants. And then from there, get into the contracting part and get rid of all the boilerplate. I used to do RFIs a long time ago that were maybe 3 short paragraphs, not 30 pages of stuff. And here's all this boilerplate in there because something might happen. Same way with BAAs. There are some pretty good BAA guides out there, but I see too many contracting officers who want to put every potential thing that might go wrong into the BAA, and they excuse that as, and I've heard this myself. I've done this myself at times in the past, that, well, if it doesn't apply, then it doesn't apply, and they don't need to respond to that. Except that it takes their time, and that's, resources are not that deep for a lot of these small businesses in particular, and startups. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the time. Oops, did I lose you there? I thought you froze.
No, no, but when you get through with that, I think Brian Layfield has his hand up.
Oh, okay. But yeah, they don't have a lot of resources to do that. So if we can make sure that our RFIs and BAAs are more focused, so that we're not wasting their time. I've seen some BAAs in particular that have been kind of embarrassing to me as a former CO, because they repeat themselves. They say, you've got 2 pages here to respond to this that won't fit in 2 pages, and yet we want you to respond to it again, but use different words in a different section. And just everything's thrown in there, but it's not really thought through. And I've read some of these and wondered, did anybody actually review these? Because I always had reviewers who read everything very carefully and had lots of comments. But those need to be as streamlined as possible to get to the non-traditional defense contractors you want to. There's one team I've worked with, the RRTO Innovation Outreach Office, and they take like written pitches of like 150 words or something like that, and they are able to go through those like 300, 400 at a time when they put a call out. They'll get 300, 400 responses. And over about 3 hours time, they can go through and say, yes, no, maybe, let's investigate this further. That's not a lot of extra work for a small business to do, to write a very short pitch and send that out and get a yes or no. So if you can have more thresholds or more down selects as you go through the process, so you can get a lot of really great ideas and say yes or no to those. Whittle that down to okay, now that I've said yes to you, can I get a 20-minute pitch from you? You're going to put together a few briefing charts anyway, throw them up and let us talk to those. And let's see what you can do. Okay, well, that really interests me. So now I want to talk to you more, or I want a written proposal, so that you're not wasting their time or the government time, and you're still able to get to the best new ideas that are out there.
That's fair, Lorna. So I think what you're hitting on there is broad agency announcements. They enable the government to be more flexible in terms of how it's identifying its requirements, and then it lowers the overhead for those really innovative technologists who, instead of managing this opportunity cost to understand the government's language, its process, and then of course meet the check boxes it needs to, rather than be able to be down selected based upon the merit of its proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's huge. And so I think that those attributes are also found in the commercial solutions opening. And so absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely agree with your point there. I was slightly break protocol. I wanted to take a question because he was waiting patiently. So I wanted to invite Mr. Brian Layfield. I know you have a question, sir. Did you want to go ahead and ask it?
Yeah, I know you said put them in the chat, but there didn't seem to be a overwhelming amount of questions in the chat. So we've been talking for the past decade, it seems, about going faster, doing things differently. And contracting has made leaps and bounds worth of changes in how we do things. We've cut regulations, we've streamlined processes, we've changed the ways we're doing things. The PM community, they've got the new adaptive acquisition framework. They've rewrote 5000.01 and 02, and they've done all these things. And I don't see the other parts of that IPT functions following suit, right? I don't see the finance community changing regulations. I don't see them rewriting fiscal laws. I mean, most of our fiscal laws are come from the 1950s, and you know, I can come up with hundreds of examples that I've seen on programs of mine, that I've seen on programs of other PCOs, where they've come up with this great idea, and then finance says, nope, it's not happening. And so wanted to see had you seen anything from attacking regulations from the finance community? Because, I mean, we can only go as fast as our one limb fact. And I think is our limb fact right now. So see what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think the next thing that you're going to see attacked will be requirements, because that process is really unwieldy. The adaptive acquisition framework, I was part of helping to work on some of those projects, by the way. That's not just for program managers, that's for everybody. And they have there are different policy letters that have been put out that address specific functions as well. Testing, cost, and so forth. One thing I'm seeing with that right now, by the way, and it's not just contracting. This is something that I'm seeing a lot of program managers not quite ready to adjust to. They're so used to DoD 5000 in the old way that they're still wanting to do what's comfortable, like with middle tier of acquisition, for example. There are things that they no longer have to do, and yet I'm seeing it with different services that are saying, well, we used to do this particular large document. We don't have to do it anymore. But I really like doing this large document, so we're going to do it as an abbreviated large document now. So they're still trying to revert back to that and not really understanding how how much relief that they are getting through the adaptive acquisition framework. That's huge in terms of acquisition, what it does for us, because for one thing, it allows you to jump between the pathways. And a lot of people don't realize that. So you could start out with rapid prototyping through MTA and then jump over to MCA, for example. But yeah, and we still have a long way to go. I've thought about this a lot, that it kind of feels like sometimes we're just putting band-aids on the system and trying to redo the system, but we're not really changing the system overall. We're changing, we're making modifications to it, but it's still the same system. The way I see for us to help get around that and to help lower these barriers is three things. And this is kind of how, when I ran the rapid acquisition cell at Eglin, this is kind of how I came up with a way of making things work and work with my customers. The office, the division I ran, needed to have three things. We needed to have innovative contracting tools. We needed to have the right mindset, and we needed to have relationships. With the contracting tools, a lot of the tools that we use now, with the exception of CSOs, have been out there for decades. I used to do this briefing to new people at SOCOM, where I would ask, I would put up a list of like 10 of my favorite innovative acquisition tools, and I'd have 4 digits after each one. And they didn't know what the digits meant. And we would get to the end of the briefing, and I would say, okay, have you figured out the digits yet? Nope, still don't know what they mean. Okay, who in here was born after 1992? Which was the last of the innovative acquisition tools I had on the list. So these tools have been out there for their entire lives, and they were unaware of it. But we haven't used a lot of these. OTs have become popular in the last few years. I did my first other transaction for research, I think it was in 1996, and 1997 was my first OT for prototype. So those aren't new. 2373, not new. These have been around for a long time. We just haven't been using them. So you can have all the great tools in the world, but if you don't have part two, the right mindset or the right culture, you're not going to be using those tools. And when it comes to mindset and culture, that also has to be at your leadership level. So you need leaders who will give you the top cover to go do the cool, uh, innovative strategies. And you need people in the trenches, your buyers and your COs, who are willing to give those a try as well. And sometimes they just need precedence. They need to see the tools, need to know who's done it before. Did they have any problems with it before they can before they'll feel comfortable with it. And then the third thing that you have to consider, and this is the real exponent, you got the tools, you got the right mindset, you're going to use those, but you need to build the relationships. If you build a relationship, you can push a lot harder than you could under any other situation. And kind of an analogy I use that's it's a little bit outdated, but let's imagine that you're out driving after midnight. You're in a thunderstorm. You get a flat tire. You are stuck in the middle of nowhere. So who do you call? And let's say no, you're not going to call AAA or yeah, you got one call to make. Who do you call to come pick you up? You're probably going to call somebody you have some type of relationship with already. You're not going to call somebody that, yeah, I saw them say something on LinkedIn or on um, one of the social media platforms, and they're kind of interesting. So, oh, hey, it's after midnight. I'm going to call them to come pick me up. They're going to answer the phone and be like, who are you? What do you want? You want me to come pick you up? As opposed to somebody that you build a relationship with. So it's the same way in acquisition. If you've built those relationships with industry, if you built those relationships with your program managers, with your staff, it's going to go a lot smoother for you. As well as to help you to get to what you need. One trick I used to use with making sure that my pricers, my policy reviewers, my legal counsel, anybody, small business, anybody who would touch any of my programs, I would take them out to the flight line and they would get a tour of what we're doing for SOCOM, so that they could see up close and personal, this is who our paper pushing work affects, and help them build that relationship. So all very important to making things happen.
So I would say that's important for many reasons, but that's the easiest way to give your folks vision of what exactly they're contributing to and how do they make an impact on a day-to-day basis. And so I think Ms. J, I saw the hand raised and I was wondering if you had a question. Please go ahead and ask, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well, two things I just wanted to say. Lorna, you might want to just tell folks what 2373 is, because everybody might not know that. And then the second thing is also, if you could for a minute chat about, I think you were there and probably the initiator of doing a multiple award contract for overall kind of development kinds of activities that you could go to it. You could, in fact, I think there were like two different sets, maybe one for small business and all that. So if you could talk to that, I think that'd be interesting for folks to hear as well.
Okay. So 2373, 10 USC 2373, that's the citation. It's now called Procurement for Experimental Purposes. It was renamed a while back. It used to be Acquisition for Experimental or Test Purposes, which was a better name. When they renamed it to Procurement for, all these folks are looking at it now as procurement equals production. So I believe it's actually now under A&S instead of R&E. So just people who don't understand it. But I did my very first one around 1993. And it was a statutory authority that I had this really great legal counsel at the time, and I was complaining to him that I am going to have to go out and do a full-blown source selection for a 60K buy, because we want to find out if these bomb casings that have been welded together are going to be as strong as what they call all forged bomb casings. And he said, well, there's a statute out there if you ever want to give it a try. I said, yes, absolutely. So we did not have to, and you can look it up. It's about 2 or 3 paragraphs long. It's very, very short. You can go sole source. You can have restricted competition, do a bake-off or a fly-off. You can do full and open competition with it. The result of it can be a FAR-based contract. It could be a bailment agreement. It can be another transaction, or other transaction-like agreement. So lots of different ways of doing it. Instead of doing a J&A, you do about a 1 to 3 page DNF. I never was more than 3 pages, and not even a full 3 pages. Most of mine were 1 page long that said, here's the background, here's why we're doing it, about 3 paragraphs of it. I would sign off on it as CO. I'd have my program manager sign off on it, and if it was over $1 million, legal counsel signed off on it. It was a really quick way of getting it done. Now, if I were doing that these days, I would not even do it with a FAR-based contract as the resulting agreement. I'd just go straight to an OT. But very quick, very effective. It's a way of buying supplies in what are now under 9 different technology areas. When I started, it was 4. And by the way, the last technology area is telecommunications, so that covers so many things. You don't even have to shoehorn it into a Signal was one of the technologies. If you're doing anything that's IT related, or robotics, or AI, or machine learning, it fits nicely into telecommunications. But just a really quick way of testing or experimenting. And you can stack, that's a Richard Dunn term, to use stack these authorities together, OTs as well as 2373. But yeah, I've done probably like 30 of those as a CO or on staff, and I've been helping with a lot of those since then. And eventually, maybe I'll actually get around to writing a guide about it, which let me back up and say this, because this is something that I think is worthwhile knowing. A couple of weeks after I retired, I had not even gotten my first retiree pension check yet. I hadn't gotten my last payment from being full-time employed. I was in the middle of selling my house. All my funds were tied up in repairs, and I got a call from a government group who said, we want you to write a guide on how to use 2373. And I said, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to. I'm just starting out my consulting business, and they're like, okay, so we want you to fly across the country and spend a week with us and write the guide, because you've done so many of these, you know more about it than anybody else, so we want you to do it. And I thought, yeah, sure, okay. And they couldn't tell me if they could pay me or not. So, okay, so actually, I'm so into this, I am willing to do the work and writing the guide for free, but you still need to fly me out there and feed me and give me a place to sleep. And at that point, they ghosted me. Which the point I wanted to make with this was with ADA violations. We tend to think in contracting that that's those program managers out there doing that, that they're always obligating the government when they shouldn't be, or trying to get the contractor to coax. I used to say, don't use synonyms for direct the contractor, coax, plead, beg, demand, whatever. But it really does happen all the time, and it happens with people who should know better. I've had it from SESs and PEOs, I mean, contracting SESs, who have asked me to do work for them, and the term that is used is informally. we want you to come do this for us informally, as in we're not going to pay you. So that was a real education in seeing that, because I kind of expected it from program managers, but I didn't expect it from everybody else. So anyway, just a point I wanted to make. So the other thing you were asking about was the multiple award IDIQ that we did. So in setting up my rapid acquisition cell so that we could take care of everything our customers had, because I had at one time 5 customers in 7 locations. But initially, I had these 3 main customers. One was like all the pre-milestone A activities, one was SOCOM, and then another was an experimental section of the weapons PEO of his portfolio. So I wanted to make sure that I could cover anything that came into the office. And this is part of the tools and the structure and the setup that can make your office successful. So, moment. So I looked across all of the different kinds of things that we were buying. We were buying a lot of studies. So that fit nicely under a BAA. So I did an omnibus BAA that included umpteen different emerging technologies, and set it up so that contractors could come in with a one-page concept paper, a one-page white paper, just basically a very short pitch. And if we were interested, then we could go back to them and have them come in and do an oral presentation, which was usually 40 minutes or less, and however many charts they wanted, whatever they wanted to present within that time period. So we had that down to almost all of those were done under 60 days. I had one that was done in 9 days because the contractor worked the weekend, and we didn't do a UCO, we did that instead. So let's see, I think we had one went 3 months, but that had a classified aspect to it. So that took care of all of my studies. And so the next thing I was looking at was I had program managers who would come to me and they would say, hey, DARPA has just offered me $8 million if I've got a contract to put this on, and it will help to fund the work that we're doing. Do we have a contract? Oh, no, we don't have a contract for that, but I can write you a UCA real quick. No. They'll only send it to us if we've got a contract. So we were doing all these demos, but we were being delayed because we'd have to go write a new contract each time. So I kind of batched, because I'd already batched all of my studies together and early prototyping together. Okay, so let's batch demos together now that we're doing, which prototypes would fit within that as well. So I came up with this idea of let's do a multiple award IDIQ. Let's make sure, because we need to grow our small businesses some. We've kind of forgotten about them. So we set it up as a almost like a small pool of small businesses. I think we had like 9 small businesses and like 13, I think it was, large businesses. So the small businesses got the first shot at it. And then after that, we would go full and open competition. But it was a way of growing our small businesses. And we had small businesses participate that I had not heard of before. So it was that was very useful for us. But just as a way of, it didn't mean that we could turn things around overnight. I mean, in some cases, we turned them very, very quickly. And in some cases, it took a lot longer, just, based on the complexity of what we're buying. The contractor that we were working with, sometimes they would take a lot longer to put their proposals together. The dollar value, all of that factored in as well. But we were, just by structuring it that way on an IDIQ, we were able to save, I think it's probably at least 5 months on the lead time on the larger ones that we did. And then we had, I think the very first 3 that we did all in the month of September, start to finish, and it did not start before Labor Day either. So, and then if I had stayed and had been able to do this, then the third leg of this portfolio that I was building, which I had actually discussed with General Holt at the time, but I wanted to build them out one at a time, would have been to set up an OT, or OT, maybe set it up as a consortium, try to do more like what DOTC was doing at that time for us, because we were sending a lot of efforts to DOTC and paying the fees to DOTC for that. So if we could keep that in-house and manage that better, that would have been the third leg that I was building.
So I guess I wanted to ask a follow-on to that. I don't see any hands raised. I guess the chat feature is not working, but if anybody does have a question, please raise your hand. I had a follow-on question in terms of like the strategy you set up there. So just paying attention to what you said, definitely the multiple award IDIQ, definitely structured in a way that you can meet all of the anticipated needs, helps you out, helps out the buyers, the program managers, helps out the, you know, the SOCOM mission. And then as far as, I think you mentioned there, it was fairly easy to on-ramp new contractors, particularly small businesses. And I guess my question is, one thing you mentioned is like data rights, and was that ever an issue in terms of the contracts that you set up? And if it ever was, like what strategies did you have to manage data rights?
With the multiple award IDIQ, it was based on the individual task orders or delivery orders. As far as data rights, a lot of times it depended on what the PEO wanted or what a senior material lead wanted. And sometimes I would run into those who were like, no, we get unlimited rights on everything, because they'd been burned at some point. So they didn't want to get burned again. I did encounter at one point, and this kind of becomes a story to tell. We had a contractor who did not want to give the government rights to something in particular. And the government really wanted rights to that so that they could go out and compete it. Contractor said, well, okay, here's the value of IP, because nobody knows how to value IP. As far as like in negotiations, how to price that out. Even the contractors have a really tough time with this. Even the people who own the IP have a tough time with it. So they came back with a really high price, because we would have had to have gone back to them sole source again and again for the same thing. So that factored into their value of it. My program office I was working with had only a few $100,000 that they could spare for this. So they decided that's the value of the IP. And when the contractor bought at this, I was asked as a contracting officer to write a contract for somebody to go reverse engineer their IP for within this couple $100,000. And having had my own IP stolen in the past, I balked at it. So the idea of reverse engineering is pretty big out there right now. That, all right, if they won't sell it to you at what you want them to, then just reverse engineer it and get it that way. And there are times when I see that as unethical, and times when I don't, because especially like with additive manufacturing, you get into situations where the company's out of business who owns the original IP, and sometimes they will sell it to you, sometimes they won't. Sometimes you can use additive manufacturing to create a better part than what they had come up with as part of their IP. So IP is a really squishy area that very few people understand. And for the most part, all the times that I ever sat on contracting officer warrant boards and asked questions, I knew very few contracting officers who understood intellectual property or data rights beyond limited, unlimited, and GPR. That was it. And yet now that's a major issue with contractors, with industry, startups and small businesses. So we have to find that middle ground. There's lots of ways you can do that, as far as licensing, and working out specific agreements. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all. And I don't think it should ever really be an unlimited rights is the one size fits all.
Yeah, I really agree, Lorna. I think it's interesting because there are ways to do things like maybe more kind of use the ICD approach where you have a common interface. And that way, you don't have to have all the rights. But then later, if you do need to have technology upgrades or something, you're able to do that and compete it. And we definitely here at Robbins, I will tell you, we have lots of examples where the contractors have just walked away from making the parts because we don't buy enough of them on some of these aging aircraft to be a good business case for them.
Yeah.
And so we do look at, reverse engineering as possibly a way to solve some of that where, we're not hurting a contractor because there's nobody there.
Yeah, yeah, and the hurting a contractor, that is exactly my threshold for it. So initially, somebody asked me, "Do you always consider that to be unethical?" It's like, well, okay, not always. It's really a case by case basis. But it's a question that you have to be able to answer for yourself and have to plan ahead for.
Yeah, agree.
So, so we have about 2 minutes, 2 minutes here, and I have to just ask one last question because I know it was one of the bullets that you mentioned. One of the topics you mentioned leading up to this meeting is wanting to talk about ANAS contracts, low
Oh,
and lowest
yes.
price, and you use the phrase brain power versus blank seats. Let's say, so I think that's pretty important because sometimes the way we write some of these contracts, or maybe our the IPTs, or the entire acquisition team, we write our contracts. We kind of disqualify, let's just say, Elon Musk from a engineering effort because he doesn't meet specific qualification requirements, right? It's not based. So, what advice would you give in terms of generating more value from ANAS contracts?
Well,
And
I was part of I I was in charge of about $1.5 billion worth of ANAS contracts at one point. I worked them as a contracting officer. I worked them as a division chief. I worked them as uh, on staff. So I got a chance to see a lot of these over the years. And around the 2005 timeframe is when we stopped doing um, or tried to stop doing cost plus fixed fee, not cost plus award fee contracts for ANAS, which had been fairly successful. There were, of course, issues with contractors. Contractors were learning to game the system at that point. So around 2005, it all switched over to, oh, now we're going to do all of these as firm fixed price, and we're going to do them lowest price technically acceptable. And that's where I saw a big change start to happen because your companies who are going to employ this brain power, if they are trying to keep their costs low, they're going to pass that on to the employees. So I've heard of uh, experts on these contracts getting their pay cut by 40K a year. And what happens is you get a chance to get rid of your dead wood by switching every few years to a new contractor, and they can weed them out. But your people you want to keep, you really want to keep. You got your recruitment and retention issues. If you're not paying competitively, and these people have any other choice, they're going to leave, or they're going to go. They'll leave the area if they can. They'll leave for a different company. Uh, if they're if their field isn't so terribly specialized that there are only like 2 job positions in the country and one is on this contract, they're going to look for something else, just to pay the mortgage, keep up their lifestyle. Or if they stay, they're staying because, and this is kind of a generalization, but they're staying because they don't have other choices. They have family in the area, maybe aging parents that they don't want to move away from, a spouse who has a job there and a very successful career, or more successful career, so they don't want to move away from that. So they don't really have any choice. And you might see a result of, yeah, you got the brain power there, but they're not as excited about the job. And so they become a bit disillusioned or disengaged from it. So if you're really wanting to buy manpower that is more brain power than, and I'll use the word because this is the term that we use a lot, butts and seats jobs, which becomes kind of an alternate government workforce, being very candid here. You have to consider what you need to do to keep the brain power. It needs to be looked at more as technical superiority than just lowest price. What is technically acceptable may be good enough, but in the long run, it's going to hurt. And this is one of the things that I've seen with A&S contracts over the last 10 years, definitely.
Very insightful answer. I appreciate that, Lorna. Well, we've gone just a few minutes over, but I wanted to thank you, Lorna. I wanted to thank you, Ms. J. I wanted to thank everyone for attending today's event. I had an absolute blast, and if you still have some follow-on questions, Lorna is very, very kind. Definitely advise that she welcomes questions. You can contact her at Tedder, TEDDER, at mitre.org, MITRE.org. And MITRE is one of our, I would say, although I'm slightly biased here, one of our most prestigious federally funded research and development centers in the country. And I think this event is, in my opinion, not only is it's a great partnership with personally a mentor to me, Lorna has been able to teach and inspire me a lot, but I also view this as a partnership with some of our FFRDCs across the country. And I think that's really important, particularly if we want to kind of upskill just our culture across the board and find new ways of doing business. I personally think, First Lieutenant Richard Rahidi, love contracting. I'll be doing it as long as I can, but I personally think that if we keep doing a lot of the same business models, we'll still keep getting the same business, keep getting the same results. So I think just experimenting, getting exposure to new business models, new ways of doing business, building new partnerships like we are doing today, I think this is an event towards that. And so I thank everyone for joining us today once again. And our next event for NCMA Middle Georgia is going to be on the 24th of March. So that's a joint event with NCMA Atlanta, NCMA Tysons, and NCMA Denver. It's called Requirements Success. And we'll have a retired SCS, Mr. William Randolph, be able to moderate a panel discussion on best practices for program managers, contracting officer representatives, and COs to work, to collaborate from end to end across the acquisition lifecycle, right? To define requirements together, award the contracts together, and then extract as much value as we can through administration. I think that's part of being a mission-focused business leader. That's our intent for the 24th of March and that event, but stay tuned for more information on that. Once again, just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Woo! You can't hear us, but we're clapping.
I can hear you clapping.
All right. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.